Hello friends, my name is Marinés, and I have a lot of feelings about the Witcher series. It all started with playing The Witcher 3, the video game, back in 2016. I am a very inconsistent gamer. I get into these moods where I'm like, I want to play a video game, and I do that and nothing else for an extended period of time, and then I get my fill and I'm like done. So it's not like reading, which I do a little bit of every day. It is very much a mood binge all at once kind of activity for me. That explanation was basically to say that I say I love The Witcher 3, but I've not actually finished playing it, LOL. So what happened was that I was in the middle of this binge. I was playing The Witcher. I was finding that I really loved the world and the characters, and I was like, okay, what I actually have to do is go back and read the source material. The original written series serves as a prequel to the games, so I kind of wanted to go backwards and finish off the books before I came back to the video game. And so in May of 2016, I read The Last Wish for the first time. It would then take me 3 years from that point to get through the entire rest of the series, but that is probably a topic for a different video. With the release of the Netflix adaptation, there has been a lot of renewed interest or new interest in The Witcher as a whole, but especially I think in the books. Soon following after the release of the series, I had a handful of messages on Twitter, around the internet, basically asking me whether or not people who enjoyed or didn't enjoy the adaptation would enjoy the series. The Last Wish is actually a collection of short stories that serves as an introduction to the world of The Witcher and to Geralt of Rivia. Reviews are mixed, and my review is mixed, so let's break it down. Firstly, it took me 3 years to get through the series because personally I think that the series gets worse and then it improves slightly and then it ends in a really weird way. I honestly don't even know how I feel about that ending yet because Here's the thing though, the thing that I like the most about The Witcher is Geralt roaming around the land, fighting monsters, and his surprise big dad energy. That's how the series starts, but as it progresses, it becomes something much more political and much more war focused and much less focused on Geralt, with lots of time apart for Geralt and Ciri. So I think whether or not you think the series gets better as it goes along really is going to have to do with how much you enjoy those elements. I mean, this never stops being what it is at its core though, and that is wild 90s fantasy. Back to The Last Wish, take this as you will, but it is my favorite in the series. I personally loved having this collection of stories as my introduction to the Witcher world. This is gonna be a love it or hate it thing, as short stories don't really work for everyone. We have in essence an introduction where we quickly cycle through plots and characters. I enjoyed it because I think it was a really interesting, fast-paced, quick way to get a wide introduction to this world, to the monsters that populate it, but more importantly to Geralt himself. I'm also a sucker for stories within stories, or things that have a very defined framing device, which this does. The stories are told out of order, but the tie is that presumably Geralt is telling about his adventures while he's recovering from an injury with Nenneke. I also enjoy the larger thing that this collection does, and that is mimic or explore classic fairy tales. You know that I love me some fairy tales, particularly ones that don't shy away from the darker undertones of fairy tales, and this does so in a very monster-focused classic fantasy kind of way. The princess to be saved in a tower is actually cursed and turned into a monster. The beauty in Beauty and the Beast is actually a vampire. Snow White survives the huntsman and is on a revenge quest. Geralt's 3 wishes from a genie go awry. And of course, the story that Geralt and Ciri's entire relationship is based on really mimics things like Rumpelstiltskin. If you think grumpy character finds himself within the framework of classic fairy tales with a lot of monsters in them sounds interesting, then The Last Wish. The real appeal of anything Witcher to me is Geralt. I love him so much. I mentioned his big dad energy, so that's one thing. I love found families, and I love the idea of taking this character who has spent his entire life and been trained to kind of be in isolation and very removed from attachments, finding himself in charge of this little princess, and that entire story, I love it. I also enjoy his backstory. I think one of the only things that makes the Witcher world unique as a fantasy series is the concept of Witchers, and the concept of how messed up it is and how complicated it is that they are made in the way that they are made, but at the same time their numbers are dwindling. I also love me a grumpy character. I know I have complex feelings about great characters, but I think that the big deal for me is when a character has a strict moral code. Whether or not I agree with it, if you can feel like this character is abiding by what they think is right and having that moral code is something that I enjoy in stories. And I super love that in The Last Wish you start to see what challenges Geralt through the entirety of the series, and that is the idea of neutrality, and how when you have somebody who is powerful, choosing neutrality is choosing to side with the powerful. Through the highs and lows and everything that I could say not only about this book but about the series as a whole, Geralt and his relationship with Ciri are the things that keep me invested and drawn in. As for ships, during the first half of my gameplay I was solidly team Triss Marigold. I love Triss a heck of a lot, even though the book series sometimes does her dirty. She is so relatively good and uncomplicated that it is hard not to love her as a character. As for Yen, I truly flip-flop on her. For me, it boils down to the fact that Yen is who Geralt wants, and so I'm like, fine, Geralt, you can have your preferred ship as a treat. Yen's story does get super better as the series progresses, but I hate her introduction in The Last Wish. I think it might be more appealing for people who are more into, say, like hate love maybe, or like fight fight kiss, like that kind of dynamic. It's kind of a larger thing than just Yen though, because the worst part of The Last Wish is 100% its portrayal of women. That is why I hesitate to say that this is a collection that subverts fairy tale tropes, because it is really not doing anything new, particularly when you look at its treatment of women. The opening scene of the collection is Geralt pretending that some silent woman is Yen and banging her, which, okay, fine, I guess, if that were in isolation. But if you look at the rest of the characters within the book, you have this incest baby Striga, you have the Bruxa, and then you have the angry and aggressive maybe demon princess. Of the non-monsters, you have the power-hungry Yennefer, you have the scheming Queen Calanthe, and then you have a handful of more positive portrayals of women, and all of those women are mostly, if not entirely, silent. Like Yola, the sexy priestess, Pavetta, the child bride, and the mystical elf queen of the valley. All of those things, again, in isolation, any one of those things is kind of like a hazy thing, but in aggregate, it really gives this collection a feeling of like not being entirely sure what the author thinks of women. And this is definitely something that the TV adaptation didn't entirely manage to purge. If you want to hear my full thoughts on the Netflix adaptation, we did do a Snark Squad pod episode about it, and I talk a lot in there also about the series as an adaptation because I couldn't help it. I have now the video game and the books like in my head, and then to see it translated to screen was just an experience in and of itself. I think that answered most of the questions I received, but let's recap. I think that if you enjoyed the video game series, there is a better chance that you will enjoy The Last Wish, because there is a lot more of that gameplay feeling of like the open world, wandering around, meeting a monster, dealing with it, and moving on to the next mission. The short story collection kind of has that feeling, and this is also, as I said, very much more monster focused. If you enjoyed the TV series, up in the air whether or not you will enjoy this. I mean, for me, the big draw of the TV series was Henry Cavill as Geralt, and the actors in general. I think all of the actors did a great job. It's weird to me when people say that they don't enjoy the writing in The Last Wish, but they liked the TV series, because the writing was the weakest part of the TV series for me, so it's kind of like up in the air. I feel like if you're not generally a fantasy reader, this isn't necessarily a good one to be an introduction into the genre. It feels very dated sometimes. There are other places I feel like you could start in order to make your way into fantasy, and this wouldn't be one that I necessarily recommend. If you enjoyed The Last Wish, will you enjoy the rest of the series? If you're invested in Yen or Geralt or Ciri, I think that part of it is strong enough to kind of pull you along. If you enjoy learning about a million countries fighting one another and like all of this, the sorcerers that are behind the scenes, like kind of doing all of the machinations and whatnot, then perhaps you will enjoy the rest of the series. If you are looking for more of Geralt wandering around and killing monsters, then maybe you won't. That's it for me today. If you have read or would like to read The Last Wish, or if you watched the TV adaptation, or if you have any Witcher feelings, come talk to me down in the comments. If you enjoyed this, consider subscribing to my channel or sharing it with your friends. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys soon. I also enjoy the larger thing which The Last Wish does. Wished.